me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello.
Hi, everybody. 5 o'clock on a Friday already, and that means time for another episode of Cello Chat. I'm thrilled to have with me today Dr. Theodore Buchholz of University of Arizona. Ted, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
All right, I'm very much looking forward to this. We have a lot to cover, but let's start with your musical journey to where you are today.
I started a little later. I grew up in South Carolina, and my mother had a public school orchestra, and I liked it. I liked it a lot. I liked making sound, but it was something that I did. And I really never had a private lesson until I was 15. I grew up in Columbia, where the University of South Carolina is. And there's a teacher who he just retired, actually, Robert Jesselson. And at some point, maybe I played for him, and he said, well, you got a lot of work to do, kid. But if you really work hard, I think I'll take you on, and we'll see what you can do. And at that point in my life, I needed that kind of focused motivation. I was ready to put the gas pedal down on something in life, but I didn't know what. And I'm really fortunate that Bob Jesselson happened to be in my hometown, kind of took me under my wing and guided me, really pushed me hard. A lot of stressful moments in those quick 3 or so years of trying to play catch up with all of my colleagues. But to this day, I have a wonderful relationship with him, and he's still a mentor to me. I speak with him regularly about, well, Bob, can you help me with this? I'm trying to figure out this situation. Anyway, so by the time I finished high school, we had really worked hard, and I had gotten up to the level where I was admittable into conservatories. And I moved to San Francisco to study with Bonnie Hampton at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And that was such a wonderful place for me, the right place, the right time. It was friendly. It felt like family was there. All of the students were certainly competitive, high level, but also we all just wanted to help each other. We just all wanted to become better cellists. And I think of those as really that's where I kind of grew up, the years of 18 to 21. And again, that was a place where I was able to maybe not study as hard as one might study other academic courses, but focus solely on the cello and spend a lot of time in the practice room trying to find what my voice was and how to make that come out of the instrument. Anyway, I had a wonderful 4 years working there with Bonnie Hampton and a little bit with Sadao Harada of the Tokyo String Quartet. And those two were just people I admire so greatly. Bonnie is someone who is at one with her cello. She just has this magnificent presence. The cello belongs to her and she to it. And with that combination, it's just an amazing musicianship, and it transcends cello, but amazing cello playing. After San Francisco, I moved to New York. When I was in high school, I played a master class for Nathaniel Rosen, the American cellist Nathaniel Rosen, and was really quite taken with his virtuosic musicianship. And I always felt, well, I want to go study with him. And so I went to the Manhattan School of Music and did a master's degree, worked with him, and he was a really, really nice person to me. He lent me a cello for 2 years. I had no suitable instrument. And I think back on that, that was one of the most gracious gestures anyone did. It was just so kind. And yeah, he pushed hard, but some of the lessons, what I remember most is just watching him play and trying to take in this amazing virtuosic musicianship that was just hitting you like a wall of sound. And I learned a lot from him, learned a lot from watching him, listening to him play. My wife and I left New York in 2006, forgive me, 2006. And at that point, I joined the Tucson Symphony, and I also started a doctoral degree, actually here at the University of Arizona. I did my doctorate here at the university and finished that. And when the time was right, the position opened up, and I've been doing a lot of teaching here in Tucson. I've been doing a lot of community organizing with something I call the Cello Congress, as well as I was very involved, like you, Benjamin. ASTA has been a big part of my career. The American String Teachers Association, I credit with giving me so many opportunities and so many platforms to kind of push myself to be a better teacher and to be more involved with my colleagues in the field. So I'm very grateful for the American String Teachers Association. And at a certain point, I was serving as president of ASTA Arizona, and about the same time was brought on faculty here at the university. Been here for almost a decade. Love it. Have a great studio of cellists. I'm learning every day, working hard to try to help them become the people, the musicians they want to be. Playing a fair amount of concerts, doing a little bit of writing. Maybe I'll talk about a project later. I got my hands in just outreach in the community. And really, I think, and I hope I express this to my students, really finding how varied, how different, how many different ways music pulls us in a great way. Teaching, writing, performing weird concerts that you never thought you were going to be improvising on stage in a theater in New York. All of these neat things that we get to do as musicians. Grateful for the experience. And again, grateful to speak with you, Benjamin.
Well, terrific. Outstanding. Now, let's see. Before we get to some of the other specific things that you have done and are into, what are some of your favorite go-tos for advice or help for students for motivating themselves to practice when they need the help?
Yeah. And this is so important because oftentimes we find there's several things going on. Either we don't maybe know how to practice. Sometimes we don't have time. That's a big issue with students these days. They have so much on their plate. Just finding the time to practice. Staying positive through that process because it can be such a demanding process. Learning, practicing, that's tough stuff. That is tough. I think we're all evolving, growing every day through that. Some of my big picture things, and maybe this steps outside of practicing, but I have this theory, and I try to hold on to this and tell this to students. Trust that who you are as a player or a musician will come out. Put it into the practice room. And then know that on stage, the average of what you do in the practice room, your musical personality, what you've worked on, that's going to come out on stage. Concerts are never going to be perfect, but know that practicing is not about necessarily nailing that 16th note run. But what you're doing in the practice room is you're putting yourself into a sound. You're putting yourself through a piece, through a cello, in a space, in a room, a concert hall that's vibrating. And know the good work you're doing in the practice room, even if you're nervous, that's going to come out. That's kind of my woo-woo, big picture take on practicing. And I think it's important to remember that because I don't know about you, Benjamin, but I've had a lot of wasted hours in the practice room, a lot of frustrating hours where I felt like I didn't get much done, though I was trying. When I was younger, I mentioned Robert Jesselson. He did sit me down and he, kind of read the riot act on, well, here's how you need to practice. And that was incredibly helpful for me. And part of that is just, well, you've got to balance your spot work, working particularly on a little passage with how you're playing through a piece, making sure you're getting performance top to bottom of a page of music every day. But don't neglect being creative. If you're not spending 5 minutes a day noodling on the cello, playing some random song that maybe you heard on the radio, then without that creativity, what are we doing? We're not stimulating this other side of our brain. And so for me, practicing became all about, okay, let's try to organize it. And let's make sure that we're getting through the necessary parts of, okay, am I using my brain? Am I balancing spot-specific work? Am I making sure I'm doing performance work to replicate how I'll feel on stage? And at the end of the day, am I thinking creatively? Am I having fun? I might share a document with you that I use with my students in a minute, but the last thing I hear myself saying to my students, and I believe this is true, and I know this is hard for some people, that the first 2 hours of the day are worth 4 hours at night. Students, me, myself, I don't know about those listening, our time's so limited, so precious, so precious. And I find myself saying to students, I know it's hard to get up in the morning. Get up. As soon as your eyes open, get out of bed, sure, brush your teeth, and then spend the first 90 minutes of your day with your cello. You will go through the rest of the day feeling like over the moon. I've already done my work for today. I can go sit through music theory class and not have to worry about, oh my gosh, I'm so worried because I need to practice scales. Get that work done first thing in the morning, and the whole day seems to soar. I found when I finally embraced that, getting up, getting my music done in the morning, my whole outlook, positivity towards performance, practicing, totally changed. Became a different person.
Nice.
Maybe I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that does make for a great segue into that document. Shall we take a look at it?
Yeah, let's take a look at this. If you'll share on the screen.
All right.
This is a PDF that I created kind of during the pandemic. It was one of those projects where, well, gosh, what do we do while we're teaching from remotely to help our students? And so I thought, I'm going to try to put my ideas of practicing into one simple page. And I'm going to try to organize it. I'll use some colors so that we can make sure we're practicing in different types of ways. I call this organized and balanced practice. And I'll just give you a quick overview of it. We won't look at every little cell, but you're going to see the top layer is these blue cells of information. And that's the mental practice that we must do every day. The orange layer, which is a sizable bulk of our practice, is the spot work. Repetitively looking at those troublesome passages, or sure, doing our dotted rhythms, our different bowings, our stop and go type of practicing on those troublesome or challenging passages. The green section is about the amount of time that I would want to spend on performance practice. Sometimes that's just one paragraph, 6 lines of music. Just a small chunk, but my goal is I'm going to perform that in my practice room, top to bottom. Even if the roof collapses while I'm playing through, I'm going to still try to make it through the last note. And then the yellow block at the bottom is not at the bottom, near the bottom. The yellow cells are ways to creatively practice. So before I dive into a little bit of these various cells, I just want to offer the overview. The blue, the orange, the green, the yellow, their size on the page is kind of the approximation of what percentage of time you should or could be spending on these various types of practice. Everyone's different, of course. Every piece will require different things. But this is just an entry point of about how to balance your time. I'll say one more thing. This blue, this orange, this green, these yellow cells, that's not actually your whole day. Those packet of 4 different types of practicing, those are actually maybe 30-minute segments that you'll want to apply to your open strings or your scales, or you'll apply all 4, blue, orange, green, yellow, to your etude that week. And then you'll apply all 4, blue, orange, green, yellow, to whatever piece you're working on that week. So it's not, the whole practice is not structured that way. I use this structure within every task that a student is practicing. So take mental practice, for instance, and I know I don't need to say this, most of you know this. An important part of mental practice is simply writing in your bowings and or fingerings. I also write in positions. I'm a believer in writing in positions. And I know most of us probably do that, but having an organized, clear way of doing that, where you're writing in the information that's most helpful to you, and maybe not including every bow, because at a certain point that becomes information vomit. That is not necessary. Having an organized way to write in your information, for me, is mental practice. For younger students, that can be singing. for any student, actually, that should be singing through the part. I also believe in kind of working through steps of singing through the part, conduct and sing through the part. I find that very helpful to apply a motor motion to what our voice is doing, tapping the rhythms, so on and so forth. The last thing I'll say about mental practice, and this is sort of a step forward, I'm a big believer in visualization. And I kind of do this with my students two ways. I have them visualize their, let's say it's an orchestra audition. I have them visualize their Beethoven Symphony 5 excerpts, hearing, feeling, seeing every note, every bow stroke from their player's perspective, and doing this all in the mind, going through the entire excerpt or audition this way. And then I have them do it a second time, where they are seeing themselves on stage and they are a dispassionate audience member, just a neutral observer, not making any judgments, just being present. So they visualize themselves on stage, and as an audience member, they are seeing themselves play every bow stroke, every up bow, every down bow, every shift, beautifully prepared and relaxedly executed. Every string crossing, elegant and even, going through every note. So for me, that's the mental practice block. And without spending a chunk of mental practice on everything we do, even open strings, I think we're kind of flying in the dark. The next big chunk, this is the orange, the spot practicing, spot work. And I suspect many of us use dotted rhythms to help us sort out a passage. And that's wonderful. It reorganizes the synapses in the brain. It just makes it different and fun, and that's worthwhile. I've got some other things in here. Sure, things like stop and go. Maybe play 4 notes only and then stop. Think about the next 4 notes, and then move on to the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th notes of that measure, so on and so forth. I've got some other things I love to do. One of my favorite things is, let's say you're working on a fast 16th note passage. Play it once, full tempo, da 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 da, and then immediately following half tempo, da 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 da. Great, good. Do it again, full tempo, da 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 da. So I call that full tempo, half tempo, and repeat that. And obviously, we want to be thinking. We want to be aware of, well, okay, are the fingers close to the string? Is it in tune? Am I coordinated? Sure. But I find that back and forth, exactly full tempo switch gears to half tempo really helps students a lot. The last thing I'll mention, there's other things, but the last thing I'll mention is I'm a big believer in using a metronome. My wife has heard more metronome than any human being should ever have to listen to. I'm a big believer in using the metronome. And sure, use it incrementally, getting faster, absolutely. One of the things I find that does is, yes, it helps our brain learn to do things quicker. It might put our brain in this space of always feeling we need to go faster. So I'm a huge fan of what I call metronome build down, where you do the reverse. And the deal with that is, yeah, you're letting yourself relax. You're getting out of that rut of, oh, I must always rush, 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 rush. But each iteration, each time you're going one click slower through the passage, demand some higher level of whatever, sound quality, excellence in vibrato, intonation, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I believe in, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next section, I don't need to spend too much time on this, is performance practice. I already started to talk about it. It can be one line of music. It can be a whole concerto, top to bottom. But we must spend a sizable chunk of our practicing time as if we're on stage. And if our phone is turned off, if someone knocks on the door, we don't answer it. Our total mindset is, I'm going to make it through this piece like I was on stage at Carnegie Hall. One of the things I have my students do is simply recording that. Just having a recorder going for some reason makes us a little bit nervous. So that helps. Another thing I do with performance practice is, I don't know if anyone's ever used an audience simulator. There are various qualities that one can find of audience simulators. I just went on YouTube, Googled audience simulator, and turned it on. And it's just a bunch of AI looking people sitting in the audience. But darn it, if playing in them didn't make me in front of them, that made me a little bit nervous. Brain's a funny place, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Just this computer of robots made me nervous. It made me more aware of this is a performance. So long story short, every day part of our work must be this is a real performance, even if you're only playing 2 notes. The last section, the yellow section, I believe in creative exploration because we are in the arts. We are not in the sciences, though much of what we do can feel like a science. Let's trigger that right side of our brain. Let's trigger that side of our brain that likes to play a phrase of music with the complete opposite dynamics and phrasing. Sometimes creative practicing can, just play your passage using only your index finger. It's not going to sound great, but it's probably going to teach you a couple of things. Sometimes that creative practice, it can be improvising, creating a melody on top of a drone. It can be anything really. But as long as we're stimulating some type of creative activity or expression, then I find we're fulfilling a needed part of practicing. I won't go into the 2 red blobs on the bottom. Those are actually kind of instructions for some of what I've talked about. And one of the other blobs is actually how I approach intonation, sort of my steps to trying to work on intonation, which is obviously important. But today, I just wanted to focus on the practicing, balanced, organized practice aspect of it.
Outstanding. All right.
I'm happy to, Google me. Any listeners, send me an email. I'm happy to send you a PDF of that.
Well, thank you. That's great. You know that flow charts have an intuitive appeal. It's just easy. Well, I'm here and I follow my path right now. And explore.
Right.
Get your brain around a spatial relation, a structure and architecture. Very nice. So I on to the next question because we have other things to cover. I'm curious about your interest in historical cello treatises and which ones in particular and how did that get started? Talk about that a bit if you would.
Yeah, great, good. And perhaps I'll just take a step back. The first time I met you, Benjamin, was probably at an ASTA conference, and seeing you present was amazing. You're elegant, really helpful when you're speaking. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I think at some point, maybe you came to a session I was giving on the topic of historical treatises. This is something I've been fascinated by for years. When I was a student in San Francisco, I would, of course, practice in the day, and then at night I'd go up to the library, and they had in the MT section of the library is where treatises tend to be cataloged. And I was just flipping through those things, trying to gather any information that would help me as a cellist. And let's see, the first one I think I actually found was Maurice Eisenberg's, which is that was a really good entry point for me because the way he wrote his book is he talks about necessary cellistic principles, but he does it through the literature. Here's a line of the Elgar Concerto, and then Eisenberg writes about what he's thinking about or how he's practicing it or what's the goal of that sort of passage. And for me at that point in my life, it was eye-opening. It was like a master class on page, and I could take it in and circle things and read back through it. So as an 18-year-old, I fell in love with this body of literature that I believed was helping me a lot to understand how the cello and the mind and the body comes together. So Eisenberg has a special place in my heart just simply because it came to me at the right time in the right place. But, you go back in history and there's a lot of amazing material out there. You've got to start with Duport, the essay on the craft of cello playing and fingering. He's really the one who codified how we actually finger the cello. Used to be you could only find that in French, but now I think online you might be able to find an English translation. And I recommend everyone just take a gander at that, flip through it. just to see how it's structured. At a certain point, I decided, okay, I'm going to read Gerhard Mantle's Cello Technique. Now, listeners, if you've seen this book, you know what I'm talking about. This is the type of book where you drink a cup of coffee, you read 2 pages, and then you go take a nap. And you wake up and you think about what you just read. But I remember reading this book and just really working through the concepts, coming to terms with this pretty technical language, having to make sense of it. And then after that process, 2 things happened. 1, I just felt good about having done it because it's a beast. And 2, taking those ideas and then kind of making them my own, I think was really helpful for me in how I teach. So I recommend that book. It's a tough, dense book. There is, I believe, not one line of music to be found in it. You won't find a note, but you will find illustrations, concepts, and really wonderful principles of how to play the cello. And then perhaps I'll mention one more that just to give sort of a sample of the different treatises that are out there. Of course, there's a lot of ancient historical ones. Cello Tutor, that's a fun one. George Kinnaway put together a book that starts to look at various different treatises. And that's a really interesting historical analysis of different treatises, George Kinnaway. But then what New Directions in Cello Playing, that's the last one I'll mention. 70, 80 pages, lots of illustrations. I really enjoy that book for just kind of thinking, well, how does one approach teaching cello in sort of our post-1950 age, where we're much more aware of our body? We're more aware of kinetic motions. We're trying to create healthy physical musicians. New Directions in Cello Playing is a book I love. So I've always loved these and always kind of loved the historical research aspect of, okay, what does this book say and how does that relate to this other book? So at a certain point, I was serving on the American String Teacher editorial board. And part of that was writing articles. And I wanted to write a 2-part article that dealt with how do the treatises address left-hand issues? How do the treatises address posture and right-hand issues? And that was a really fun project for me to go through, see what all of these books said, put them in dialogue. Well, this says this, and actually Alexanian adds this to that concept, and you can kind of see how that might have come from Casals. And that lineage, that tracing the thought processes was very fascinating for me. Anyway, those were published in American String Teacher, and I really had fun with that project because at the end of the day, it's just, well, here are ideas. How do you make sense of them? How do you put them together? Where do they come from?
Nice. Very nice. All right. The next thing I want to ask you about, in several cello teachers, cello professors' biographies, there is a mention of an interest in cello pedagogy, which you and I and many people find fascinating. Yours also talks about chamber music pedagogy, which is a different thing, trying to take 4 people who are each immersed in their own part and get them to rise above that and create a larger unit, and not just over a large amount of time, but hopefully in a very efficient manner. How did you get into specifically chamber music pedagogy?
Yeah, I have always loved chamber music, and I presume that's true for everyone here. If you've had the experience of playing chamber music, it's just amazing, a different experience. It is the embodiment of collaboration and open ears and open minds, giving and taking. It's everything. Love it. I came out of San Francisco Conservatory, which had a very formidable chamber music program. And I feel in some ways that's where I learned to play, really. I was being held accountable for providing my notes to my colleagues to make this ensemble work. And that experience was just eye-opening. And I think part of it comes from the sense of leadership or responsibility that we must have. So when I came to the University of Arizona, I designed a chamber music course that in some ways was based on my experiences. But, well, there was a lot of growing to do here at the university. And so the first years we were building the program, redesigning the curriculum, and really just building the numbers here. Mm-hmm. So my interest in the pedagogy, the leadership of a chamber music program, came from a necessity of needing to build that here. And since that time, I've been joined by wonderful colleagues, Molly Gabriel, violist, and Tim Cantor, violinist, who comes from the Alfiara Quartet. And so we have a wonderful time co-teaching the chamber music class. And it's done well. I think students really enjoy that class. But like you say, thinking about the pedagogy of chamber music, in some ways, it's very different from what we do in the cello studio. There's aspects of leadership. There's aspects of collaboration that maybe one doesn't have to address the same way when you're looking at the cello repertoire. I was working with a Schumann piano quartet on Friday, and their assignment this week is they have to rehearse twice, of course, this week. And the first half of the next rehearsal, one person is designated as the leader. They have to design everything that's going to be accomplished in that first hour of their rehearsal. What are the measure numbers that they're working on? What are the primer exercises that they might explore? Maybe that's just a scale using a rhythm or a bow stroke from the Schumann. But for the first hour, one person is totally accountable for leading that rehearsal in a productive way. Second hour, then I think the pianist comes in. Later in the week, the other rehearsal, same deal. Maybe the cellist is starting the rehearsal for the first half, and then it's the violist who has the second. And this is not about authoritarian leadership. This is just about everyone gets a chance to step up into that role and say, I have a vision for how this rehearsal is going to go, and let's see what we can do. So that's just one exercise, but I find maybe you can't really do that in the cello studio the same way. Chamber music is a unique place where we get to build these skills.
Yeah. Yeah. So that makes a good segue into the leadership in the arts line in your website as well. Because leadership, well, we all need leadership as performers, as musicians, but leadership in the arts can provide such a valuable just place in terms of helping us move forward in exposing everybody to arts and all the benefits that come with them. So can you talk about what your vision is for leadership in the arts?
Yeah. And I think in some ways, this is a skill that we all develop, even if we don't know it. If you had asked me 20 years ago, I would have, pulled the hoodie over my head and shied away and said, no, thanks, not interested in public speaking. Of course, we all have that feeling. But at the same time, I suspect we all have this feeling, this passion for what we're doing, whether that be teaching or just making sound on the cello, or maybe it's the repertoire that we're passionate about. We have this passion. And I think for most of us at some point, that inspires, fuels us to break free of our shells. And in some small way, we all step into leadership positions. We all do. No matter what we're doing in music, there's a leadership component of it. And again, this is not something I thought I would necessarily be doing. I thought I would be kind of just teaching and playing concerts. But that's the amazing thing about music. It shows you these areas where one is, there's a vacuum. And we as musicians, I think, are really good at saying, I'm going to go fill that vacuum and create something over here. And that could be just a simple concert. That could be a Saturday program for children. That could be volunteering for some sort of music event. But that's the great thing about music. There's always a need. And my experience in life has been the music community is very warm and friendly. Sure, it's a competitive world, but it's actually a warm, giving community. And if you give back all the better. People want to work with you, and it's this place where one can grow as a leader. Here at the university, I guess some of the leadership things I've enjoyed, there was a brief 8-year stint where I was kind of chairing the string area. And I really enjoyed doing that when I came into the university, growing the program, and that recruiting, but also building chamber music program, building some curriculum. I really enjoyed doing that. And then I also built the string project here at the university. And that has just been so eye-opening, so wonderful. There are components of that stress me out every day. Budget, I'm looking at you. Well, I mean, that's a fact of life, right? We're in the arts. We all need to know how to build a budget and try to adhere to that, and how to fundraise, which is something we're actively doing here at the University of Arizona String Project. But that leadership has just been amazing. Before this meeting here tonight, I was meeting with a violin string project faculty, someone named Delia, who's a great undergraduate student who's teaching violin in our string project. And our meeting ran about an hour, 15 minutes late, because it's just such a joy to talk about who are you teaching, what are they doing right now, and what's your goal for them at the end of the semester. And I'm lucky, we've got great students here. They're responsible. They work hard. And the string project team is amazing. I'm so grateful for them. They care so much. And this way of thinking, I'm a teacher now, even if I'm an undergraduate student, I'm a teacher, I'm responsible. I find that builds in them this sense of leadership that you hear it immediately the next time they themselves play on stage. It's just amazing watching these students who start to teach, and then, wow, suddenly they're a different performer on their own instrument. So I think, again, back to we all become leaders. The simple act of teaching is an act of leadership. We commit to guiding this person, to giving them the insight, the gift, the joy, whatever someone else shared with us, and to leading them through how to play this instrument, how to make a joyful noise.
Well said. Well said. All right. Projects, performances coming up in 2023. What's on your plate?
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll start with the big one. Robert Jesselson, my first teacher, and he was the professor at the University of South Carolina for many years. He and I are writing what we hope will be the most comprehensive scale book to date. This will be published by Mel Bay Publications about Christmas time next year. Oh, so wow. The holidays, about 6-8 months. So we're working, this is fun. This is a fun project. What we're trying to do is, offer all sorts of scales, from the first octave, first day of scales, all the way to quarter tone scales, to all the double stop, thumb position, all the tough stuff. And while we're giving these scales, we're trying to fold in essential pedagogical concepts, how we introduce which bow strokes to use, how we introduce how you start to think about shifting as you're going through these scales. Okay, then how do you think about shifting the next time you're going through these scales? So I think what we're trying to do is to provide someone a one-stop shop where you can get all your scales, but also here are some ways to maximize what you're doing with scales. Here are some concepts that may help you, so that the process of learning scales is not only fun, challenging, but also rewarding. I don't know about you, Benjamin, or the audience. I have always loved doing scales. I love them.
I don't think everybody in the audience shares that opinion yet, but with your book.
Yeah, maybe. I hope so. Yeah, I've always enjoyed, because it was sort of, okay, I think I can play these notes. I don't have to look at the music, really. It's just a scale. And I can really focus on making a beautiful sound, which at the end of the day, I think that's what we're all trying to do. Let's just fill this room with joyful noise. So that's the big project. So stay tuned for that, coming up in December-ish.
Okay.
Other than that, let's see. I've got some piano trios. That's sort of my preferred chamber music genre. Piano trios. I love the repertoire. Got some piano trios coming up, and I'll play those here in Arizona, and then as well in California, and just some great repertoire. Dvorak's first piano trio, which is not that commonly played, as well as Schoenfield's cafe music, which I think many people are knowing. And if you don't know that, check it out. Schoenfield cafe music. It's a wild ride. It's a hard ride too. I'm having to practice that. Yeah. And then I just finished, this is not on the horizon, but I just finished a project that I've been wanting to do for probably almost a decade. In the fall, I gave a 4-part lecture series on the Bach suites. And that was through the University of Arizona in a program called the Humanities Seminars. So it was outside of the School of Music. But I had all the cellists here at the university with whatever suite they were working on. They were the folks who came in and played and broke things down a little bit. We went through the historical aspects of it. We tried to find unifying themes. And throughout these lectures, we played every movement, all 36 movements we made it through. That was a lot of fun, and that was a project I've been wanting to do for many years. Fortunate to have been able to do that this fall.
That is a fun. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how certain things in not just our repertoire, but just masterpieces where no matter how many people dig as deep as they can, there's always more fun. They're just so timeless.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think about the Bach. Steve Initialis recently came out with a book, and then someone else just came out with a book. Forgive me, I'm drawing a blank, but it's a Selma. I won't be able to pronounce the last name. Selma Gotchik, something like that. British cellist.
Right.
She's just written a new Bach book that's come out that I haven't read yet, that I expect is just amazing. Yeah. These books come out, and they're always a joy to read because, like you say, there's just so much there that one can explore.
All right. Well, best of luck with all of that. And thanks so much for being my guest. I'll look forward to seeing you in Orlando next month.
See you at the ASTA conference. That's a wonderful event. I remember the first time I went, opened my eyes to what's out there in the world in string teaching. And I look forward to seeing your sessions.
Well, terrific. All right. Well, thank you again. And to everybody out there, happy practicing all week long. We'll see you this time next Friday. Take care.